Since the attack on 7th of October, the collective punishment inflicted on Gaza has been shocking. 90% of the population has been displaced, being moved from pillar to post. 96% face acute food insecurity, now with over 42,000 deaths in the past year. Though this number doesn't include the thousands of bodies still buried under the rubble of destroyed buildings.
Questions must be raised as to the absurdity of a situation in which we as a country provide both the aid and the weapons to bomb the besieged people of Gaza.
The way in which Israel's occupation has been directed entirely towards the destruction of Palestinian life, Palestinian buildings, schools, roads, hospitals and everything else. I've never forgotten going to Beach Primary School in Jalabia refugee camp many years ago. Wonderful school, wonderful place, wonderful children. And with joy, these children sat down and read, through translation, the poetry they'd written about their lives, their hopes and what they wanted to achieve. And then we went onto the roof of the school, and you could see the fence on one side, and not that far away you could see the sea. And to the north you could see Ashkelon. And you could feel the sadness in their voices as they said, we're never going to be able to go anywhere. We're never going to be able to travel anywhere. We are forever prisoners in this school and our homes. But at least at that time, they had homes and a school. I've seen the footage and seen the films. The school is totally destroyed. Many of those children that I met who were so happy in those days are now deceased.
But I have to question what happened on the 18th of September at the UN General Assembly, a forum where we could have used our influence in a different way. 124 countries, including our allies in France and Spain, Norway and New Zealand, had the courage to call for that ceasefire and to put it on record. And it's one thing to call, but when we have a vote, we know it is decisive and it makes a difference. And I just cannot comprehend why we didn't use our leverage at that critical point to try and stand by the people who are suffering in Gaza right now.
Can I just thank everybody for attending this very important debate. I want to begin by first paying tribute to the humanitarian aid workers in Gaza who continue their life-saving efforts to face impossible odds, despite having every reason to lose hope. They remain steadfast in their mission to provide aid and are the only source of survival and hope for the people of Gaza. Sadly, at least 289 of these brave individuals have been killed. And I trust members here will join me in honouring each and every one of them. Chair, the horrors facing the people of Gaza are overwhelming, reflecting Israel's efforts to strip away their humanity. Since the attack on 7th of October, the collective punishment inflicted on Gaza has been shocking. 90% of the population has been displaced, being moved from pillar to post. 96% face acute food insecurity, now with over 42,000 deaths in the past year. Though this number doesn't include the thousands of bodies still buried under the rubble of destroyed buildings, loved ones who will never be recovered. This debate is not about the Israelis' military onslaught of the Palestinian civilians in Gaza. It's about those being killed, not by weapons, but by lack of basic humanitarian assistance. Israel has weaponized the denial of aid, pushing the remaining Palestinians to the brink of death. The health crisis in Gaza is devastating. Since October the 7th, at least 10 children per day have limbs amputated, many without anesthesia. Over 500,000 of the population suffers from disease like jaundice, caused by malnutrition and the unsanitary conditions they're forced to live in. That's the size of almost half of Birmingham's population. Hospitals, the very places that could help, are in ruin. 31 of Gaza's 36 hospitals and most UN healthcare stations have been damaged or completely destroyed by Israeli airstrikes and ground operations. The Lancet estimates the real death toll could be closer to 186,000, and with flood season approaching, the situation is set to get even worse. This isn't a case of shortage of aid, as we all know. We've all seen thousands of trucks lined up on the border. It's a deliberate act. Israeli authorities are intentionally limiting the supply of vital aid. They've destroyed civilian infrastructure, schools, water stations, mosques, churches, and claim military necessity. But the humanitarian workers on the ground tell a very different story. These are not military targets, yet the bombs keep falling and critical aid facilities are being obliterated. Before October 7, Gaza was receiving 500 aid trucks a day, just enough to keep the population afloat. Now the numbers stand at a mere 52, according to Oxfam aid workers.
On that point,
Yes, I'll give way to the number.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Throughout the past 12 months, the UK government has failed to highlight or prevent the Israeli government's denial of international assistance into Gaza and its clear breaches of international humanitarian law. The UK has also failed to highlight the Israeli government not complying with International Court of Justice orders, which require it to facilitate the unimpeded access to Gaza of United Nations and other officials engaged in the provision of humanitarian aid. The UK is failing to stand up for international law as Israeli forces are forcibly transferring civilians as we speak from... Yeah. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the UK must urgently act to enforce UK Security Council resolutions?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. Of course, I think we all sing off the same hymn sheet when it comes to what the UK should be doing. Experts, Chair, say 2,000 trucks are required to address the current crisis. 2,000, where we only have 52 coming in at the moment. Aid convoys are being blocked, not only at the checkpoints by Israeli soldiers. We've all witnessed some of the Israeli civilians blocking aid at crossings, like Kerem Shalom and Nitzana. And whilst the Israeli army are competent to disperse thousands of protesters in Tel Aviv within minutes, they choose not to disperse the less than 100 protesters blocking life-saving aid. And even once they get through that blockade, they are shot at by IDF forces, either by snipers, drones, or other military means. We all know about the killings of the 7 aid workers from the World Central Kitchen charity, which included 3 British aid workers. This was despite the Israeli army being given coordinates and information about locations.
Would he give way?
I'll give
The honourable gentleman for giving way. He mentioned aid workers. Would he not agree with me when it's not just aid workers, but media workers, teachers, doctors and medical staff, when we see a discrediting of the UN, a delegitimisation, and he mentioned buildings, even the oldest church in Christendom, it does feel like even within the rules of war, something's gone wrong here.
I thank the honourable member's contribution and intervention. Of course, and the biggest problem we have is that journalists are not allowed in. And one has to think about the reason why journalists are not being afforded the opportunity to report impartially, and it's not happening. If the Israeli government had nothing to hide, you would expect them to be welcoming journalists into a war zone. The risks are down to the journalists. But we've seen this on an enormous scale. Journalists believe that they are being targeted specifically, so there's no reporting from within. Chair, this is collective punishment on an enormous scale. There are no red lines for Netanyahu's government. The actions of the IDF over the past 369 days are not those of a moral army, as Israel claims, but one that has crossed every moral and legal boundary. Netanyahu's pursuit of Gaza's destruction is relentless and will not stop unless forced to do. I welcome the reinstatement of the UNRWA funding by this government, but we must do more than just...
Give way.
I will give way.
I agree. Well, firstly, I thank the honourable member for giving way. And I agree the calls for additional aid and safe routes for the delivery of aid into Gaza are vital and encouraged. However, would the member agree that questions must be raised as to the absurdity of a situation in which we as a country provide both the aid and the weapons to bomb the besieged people of Gaza?
I agree with my honourable member, and I'm sure there'll be much more in terms of contributions throughout this debate. But I welcome the reinstatement of the UNRWA funding by this government. But we must do more. We must address the root cause of the suffering. An immediate, permanent ceasefire is absolutely essential. Diplomatic calls from all governments of various nations have fallen to deaf ears. The only option available now is to enforce a ceasefire by the prohibition of all arms sales to Israel. If the UK did this, it would send a clear message to others that would inevitably follow suit. But as innocent lives are being lost, this government has done little to change the course of Israelis' aggression. I ask the rhetorical question, how can we send aid on the one hand whilst providing the weapons of destruction with the other? How can we claim to stand for morality and justice when we are complicit in this collective punishment? Of course, the time is of essence, Chair. Every 10 minutes, another child in Gaza dies. This regime of mass murder and destruction is fueled by the West's unconditional support and granting full impunity for the breaches of international and humanitarian laws. The change for time is now, not later. So I ask, Chair, will the Minister admit that Israel is actively blocking efforts to distribute humanitarian aid and reach a ceasefire agreement? And what will the government do to encourage Israel's opening of border crossings for humanitarian aid? Thank you, Chair.
There are a number of members who wish to speak, and I'm going to impose an informal 3-minute time limit, so please be kind to each other so that you can all get in. The question is that this House has considered humanitarian aid and Gaza. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Ms. Bass, and thank you to my friend, the member for Perry Barr, for getting this debate today. It is absolutely crucial and essential. Last night, my friend, the member for Blackburn, and my friend, the member for Perry Barr, attended a film showing by Al Jazeera to a cinema nearby here. And that film was of raw, very raw footage of the behaviour of Israeli soldiers in Gaza, about destruction of life, and about the appalling death toll of children, particularly across Gaza. And it showed soldiers cheering when they'd managed to destroy an entire Palestinian village. It showed pictures that were devastatingly realistic in the horror they showed of the torture against Palestinian prisoners being held in Israeli prisons. And after that, we had a question and answer session with a number of people, lawyers, medical people, and so on. And the doctor who was there described how when she tried to enter Gaza to act as a doctor, she was restricted to one suitcase. She was told she had to bring in 3 days' water supply. She was told she had to have her own personal security. She was told she had to have a car and a driver with her at all times in order just to undertake her work as a doctor. And she said there are very few hospitals working in Gaza. The conditions are appalling and abominable. And many doctors are now not working in Gaza anymore because they simply cannot get in because Israel controls all access and exit to Gaza. And so this small number of very brave and wonderful doctors that were working there are now being forced to go elsewhere. And so what this film showed was the way in which Israel's occupation has been directed entirely towards the destruction of Palestinian life, Palestinian buildings, schools, roads, hospitals, and everything else. I've never forgotten going to Beach Primary School in Jalabia refugee camp many years ago. Wonderful school, wonderful place, wonderful children. And with joy, these children sat down and read, through translation, the poetry they'd written about their lives, their hopes, and what they wanted to achieve. And then we went onto the roof of the school, and you could see the fence on one side, and not that far away you could see the sea. And to the north you could see Ashkelon. And you could feel the sadness in their voices as they said, we're never going to be able to go anywhere. We're never going to be able to travel anywhere. We are forever prisoners in this school and our homes. But at least at that time, they had homes and a school. I've seen the footage and seen the films. The school is totally destroyed. Many of those children that I met who were so happy in those days are now deceased. Famine is there in Gaza. It is registered as a famine around the world. Polluted water, inadequate food, inadequate medical supplies, absolutely appalling situation. And so we have to, yes, demand all the aid that we can to go into Gaza. Obviously, we would do that for any people anywhere in the world. But when there are over 40,000 recorded deaths and possibly 100,000 more bodies waiting to be discovered under the rubble, the answer has to be a political one. Why are we still supplying arms to Israel, knowing full well that those arms, in contravention of ICJ rulings, are actually being used to bomb civilian targets in Gaza? War crimes are being committed before our very eyes on our televisions every night. It's up to our government, to show that if it believes in international law, it would halt the supply of weapons to Israel because it knows full well those weapons are being used to destroy human life in breach of all aspects of international humanitarian law.
Thank you. I just want to say that I expect to take wind-ups from the front bench at about 4:05. Florence Echeloni.
Thank you, Ms Vaz, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship this afternoon. And I also want to pay a tribute to the member for Birmingham Perry Bar for securing this really important and timely debate. A year on from the tragic terrorist attack by Hamas, with an estimated 101 people still being held hostage, we are seeing the devastating impact on innocent civilians caught up in this war. As we've heard, it's estimated that over 41,000 Palestinians have been killed, over 90,000 injured, and up to 1.9 million people have been internally displaced. Thousands of families are trapped, unable to leave their homes to find vital food and water, and many are now facing starvation. Chair, shortly after this conflict started, I met with Islamic Relief UK, who were based in my Vauxhall and Camberwell Greens constituency. They spoke to me about the devastation and the impact on the ground in Gaza, including the bombing of their offices, and the fact that they lost contact with their aid workers for 2 days. And over the past year, Islamic Relief UK have distributed over £26 million of aid to the people in Palestine. I want to pay tribute to Islamic Relief UK and the many other aid organisations and the charities working on the ground, with their aid workers risking their own lives to help innocent civilians. Along with many others, I welcome the Foreign Secretary announcing in his first statement to the House that the UK will lift the pause on funding to UNRWA and an additional £21 million to support this work. But sadly, we know that that money is going to be too late for many people who've already died. I had the opportunity to meet with a senior representative from UNRWA last week, and he outlined 3 main challenges to me. One being logistical. The vital aid continues to be blocked. There are estimated 70 trucks going in, compared to the 400 pre this conflict. Moving aid around Gaza is near on impossible, with an estimated 30% of that aid being looted because people are just so desperate. Aid workers are being attacked. The second was political. We all have to acknowledge the concerted attempt to discredit and undermine the work of UNRWA. And as the Foreign Secretary stated, UNRWA is absolutely central to those efforts, and no other agency can get aid into Gaza in the scale needed. However, there are 3 bills currently in the Kesnet aimed at UNRWA in terms of discrediting its operation in East Jerusalem, stripping its status as an aid agency, and declaring it as a terrorist organisation. The third one was financial. There are still serious difficulties, and the largest donor has still not reinstated their fund in the US. So I asked the Minister if he's aware of the letter today co-signed by 15 leading aid agencies, including Islamic Relief UK, Medical Aid for Palestine, Oxfam, calling on the UK to continue to take a stand on upholding international law, to oppose the annexation in northern Gaza, and to support the independence of the ICJ and reviewing the sale of arms. As we enter the second year of this conflict, we reinstate our calls for immediate ceasefire and lasting peace in the region.
Under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the honourable member for securing the debate. Earlier this week, 6 Arab ambassadors came to speak to members in this House, and they include not only Palestine and Lebanon, the 2 main protagonists here, but Egypt, Saudi, Jordan and Bahrain. And they said that they spoke on behalf of the whole Arab community. And the message they wanted to get across to members was that long-term peace and security is attainable in the region. It has been for nearly 20 years now under the Arab Peace Initiative, and that looking forward, that is still the prospect, the one that they want, and that includes all, not just Arab states, but 58 Muslim states around the world, not just recognising but cooperating fully with Israel. And yet what we have seen over the last year is the opposite of that, the ratcheting up of violence. Now that has happened on both sides. And nobody here holds a brief for Hamas or Hezbollah. But because of the asymmetric nature of this war, almost all the deaths post the terrible atrocity of the 7th of October last year have been among Palestinians, predominantly 41,000 in Gaza and almost 1,000 in the West Bank, and now over 2,000 Lebanese civilians as well. So the question for today, is what is the British government's response going to be to this? And yes, the government's consistently calls for ceasefire, and the Minister, who does his job excellently, has been very consistent in saying this, but there is no response. On the contrary, the atrocities get worse. What is happening? We saw today another school attacked, nearly 30 people killed there, attacks on UN positions by Israeli forces. Yes, the government is right to emphasise aid, which is the subject of this debate, and the practicalities of getting aid in. But there are also these attacks going on a daily basis on civilians. There is forcible transfer of the population. There are breaches of international law happening all the time. There is collective punishment of the Palestinians, particularly in Gaza. There is famine and there is disease throughout the territory. And so I say to the Minister gently that we do need more from the government now. We need to know what the government is going to do to ensure that a ceasefire happens. What are the practical steps it can take with allies? And we also need, and this was emphasised very much by the ambassadors this week, we also need an early and clear recognition of a Palestinian state. Mm-hmm. Until that exists, it is almost impossible to frame the terms of a ceasefire and a lasting peace in the region. And that is what we need.
John McDonnell.
I want to raise again the issue about the evacuation of children from Gaza. Children have been seriously injured. Months after the war started, no, let me go back one. When the Ukraine war started, we very rapidly put in place a mechanism for the evacuation of injured children from Ukraine to hospitals here to ensure that they had the appropriate treatment. And it was a system that worked and seemed to have worked effectively. Soon after the attack on Gaza, my friend Kate Holland, who was the member for Blackburn, raised in this House the issue about trying to instigate a similar scheme for Palestinian children. I raised it, I think she did that around November, December time. We heard nothing back. So I raised on the floor of the House with the then Deputy Foreign Secretary the issue again, and we were given an assurance. I'd met with the voluntary organisation Save Gazan Children based in France, and there was also Save a Child were doing the work to evacuate children from Italy at that point in time, and other countries surrounding Palestine itself as well. I raised it again in May because we had no response. Then the general election happened, so I wrote to the Prime Minister because I felt this needed a Prime Ministerial push to get this through. I raised it with the Foreign Secretary because we needed to ensure our diplomatic efforts were involved. And I raised it with the Home Secretary. I wrote to the Home Secretary as well because we need the visa arrangements put in place. I never received a response. So I wrote again in August to my honourable friend from Oxford East, who was the Minister of State for International Development. And I did receive a response, but it was not about the evacuation. It was about the assistance that's being provided to organisations working, hopefully, as best they could within Gaza. So I wrote again, and I haven't received a second response. I'm not sure what's happening in government on this. I understand a new government has come in. It's difficult settling down, sorting out arrangements in place. But this is a matter of urgency. We've had further reports this morning of another hospital being attacked. And we've also heard reports of the doctors being threatened if they didn't evacuate, they would be arrested. And we've even had ambulance workers arrested this morning as well. And they're leaving children, they're having to either evacuate children from intensive care, which is risky, or they've been forced to leave them behind. And some doctors, as a result of that, are risking their lives. What we could do is exactly as we've done with Ukraine, just simply establish a system to ensure that the most seriously injured children are evacuated. Clinicians are willing to assist here. In fact, I've had clinicians contact me and say, what can we do? How can we assist? I just asked the Minister to take this back and come back as a matter of urgency now, because children are dying as a result, and we can't stand to one side.
Mary Kelly-Foy. The Honourable Member for Birmingham Perry Bar for securing this afternoon's debate. And in the short time that I have, I want to focus on the plight of Christians in Palestine. In April this year, I was honoured to meet Father Gabriel Romanelli, the parish priest at the Holy Family Church in Gaza, who informed a group of MPs of the tragedies that had befallen his flock. None more so, perhaps, than the killing of Nahida Anton and her daughter Samar, two parishioners at the church who were killed inside the compound of the parish by a sniper, and several others were wounded. It was the week before Christmas, a Christmas that would be for Palestinians observed under rubble, in ruins, and in perpetual fear. And the Reverend Isaac Munther put this into words when he said, if Jesus were born today, he would be born under the rubble in Gaza. And we all know that places of worship should be protected under the Geneva Conventions. And I say should be, because in this instance and many other instances they're not. And it's heartbreaking then to consider that both Nahida and Samar must have thought that they were safe in church, when in fact a sniper was targeting them. I can't imagine what the family were going through. Chair, what happened at the Holy Family Church is, I think, a microcosm of the war itself. A war where human rights are ignored, where long-standing conventions are breached, and where innocent people like Nahida and Samar are killed. And earlier this year, I asked the former Deputy Foreign Secretary whether the FCDO condemned the attack. The Right Honourable Gentleman said, and I quote, "We are not clear about the full facts of what happened." In contrast, Cardinal Vincent, the Archbishop of Westminster, was unambiguous. He said, they were shot in cold blood inside the premises of the parish where there are no belligerents. The Cardinal also said the people of Gaza are not given to telling lies. Chair, I implore the Minister from the bottom of my heart to listen to the Palestinians in Gaza, reflect on the bitter injustices of Nahida and Samar's deaths, and to all of those who have suffered similar fates. Ms Vaz, the last time I spoke about Palestine in Westminster Hall, the death toll was 25,000. It's now, as we've heard, well over 41,000. So I urge the Minister
to use the full weight of the FCDO to bring this war to an end, and to commit to the Palestinian people that we will assist them in rebuilding their lives. We need diplomacy, not an all-out war, and the people of Gaza cannot have another Christmas under the rubble.
Dr. Adam.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank my honourable member for during this very vital discussion, and it's an honour to serve under your speak under your chairship. I just want to reiterate and confirm with my honourable member who discussed about the children. All victims of war are devastating, but when it comes to innocent children belonging to all faith and no faiths, it really does affect our humanity and our future. And I want to ask the Minister that as we speak, there are less than 16 hospitals standing in Gaza. And there is nowhere for children to be treated. And there are over 50,000 children that require treating who are not even victims of the war. It's malnutrition and other ailments that they are suffering from. Can we, like some of our other European partners, look at avenues and mechanisms to bring them here or treat them somewhere neutral to give them that much needed support that they need? Thank you very much.
And I congratulate the member for Pogal for organising today's event. The tragedy of Gaza just leaves us speechless. The devastation that we are witnessing is horrific on our screens, but to be in Gaza is unimaginable at this time. And of course, we stand by all those on both sides who are experiencing the trauma of loss with hostage taking and life lost. But we know that this can be prevented. It's immoral and it's man-made, and we've got to act stronger on this. Of course, we've got to end the sale of all arms and end those export licenses. We need to up our funding, as the ambassadors called for, to UNRWA, and we need to apply greater leverage, including sanctions, to ensure that we can get a political outcome to this. But I have to question what happened on the 18th of September at the UN General Assembly, a forum where we could have used our influence in a different way. 124 countries, including our allies in France and Spain, Norway and New Zealand, had the courage to call for that ceasefire and to put it on record. And it's one thing to call, but when we have a vote, we know it is decisive and it makes a difference. And I just cannot comprehend why we didn't use our leverage at that critical point to try and stand by the people who are suffering in Gaza right now. Because we know that things are turning even worse, the suffering even greater. When we think about the seasonal change we're about to enter into and the risks that come from that, when we see the data from the Famine Early Warning System network highlighting the scale of malnutrition, hunger, and of course the spread of disease. When we know that people are dying every day before our eyes, and we could do more. I just ask the Minister that when he is at those platforms and his colleagues, that he does everything possible within his power to use that leverage to call this to an end. We just cannot cross by on the other side, and we cannot seek to make perfection the enemy of good. And even if resolutions aren't perfect, we know that they can save lives, they can end the carnage, and they can build the hope of having food and clean water and aid to heal wounds and bring pain relief. So I just say to the Minister, every opportunity must be utilised to ensure that we have the humanitarian response to end this nightmare.
Sana Begum.
Thank you, Chair. In February this year, I secured and led a debate on the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. During the debate, I quoted Save the Children International's Chief Executive Officer's harrowing plea, "We are running out of words to describe the horror unfolding for Gaza's children." 8 months later, it is devastating, absolutely, utterly devastating to be here again today and that things have gone from worse to worse. As such, I urge the government today to refrain from the insult of the usual euphemistic phrasing of speaking of too many civilians being killed or broad references to the humanitarian situation without condemning the actions that are so clearly responsible. This is not about some random natural disaster. It is just beyond disturbing that so many cannot express a simple condemnation of the type of war being conducted by the Israeli military, the unprecedented death toll, the violence against women and children, the deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructure, the blocking of aid and the weaponized starvation. It's just not enough to repeat the lines that Israel must uphold international human rights standards in theory when it is so clear that they have not and are not doing so and have effectively been given the go-ahead to continue to not do so. And quite frankly, the UK's continued support and facilitation of this is absolutely shocking to my constituents and indeed the majority of people in the UK. No matter the brutality and censorship at home, the silencing, the spin, and the inescapable truth is that civilians in Gaza, including large numbers of children, are facing healthcare shortages and diseases. This is what happens when hospitals are targeted and health and sanitation and other infrastructure are willfully destroyed. My constituents have opposed this, but this is what the UK continues to facilitate. Civilians in Gaza, including large numbers of children, are not only starving, but they are being starved. This is what happens when food is being prevented from getting to those who need it. Civilians in Gaza, including large numbers of children, are not simply dying, they are being killed. The lifting of the pause on funding to UNRWA is a welcome step forward, but as we speak, new mass displacement orders will worsen the entire already dire situation. I'm speculating today that the Minister will likely assert something along the lines that aid must get to where it is needed in theory. Yet everyone is clear that aid is being blocked and hindered by Israel, the UK's close and staunch ally. The best way we know to ensure that aid is delivered is to secure a ceasefire. I do want to mention that it's important that there is an arms embargo, including the F-35 fighter jets, which are being traded to be used against civilians. It does have implications for global human rights benchmarks. The horrors that are continuing to unfold before our eyes means that we are being changed forever. But it has been made very clear that UK and US foreign policy interests are being pursued with an utter disregard for Palestinian life. It is chilling, and the complicity will never ever be forgotten.